I'm in charge now. 2 weeks and you're out. That's what Ethan, the CEO's son, said across the acquisition table like he'd just announced the winner of a raffle at a county fair. 29 years old, hair slicked back with too much gel, a smirk pasted on like it had been practiced in the mirror. He thought that sentence would shatter me. Instead, I smiled. Not the polite smile you give at a company dinner when the salmon is undercooked. The kind of smile that comes when you've seen a storm building for months, and you know the thunder is about to hit someone else's roof. The room went quiet. The buyer's executives shifted in their chairs. One of them, gray suit, steady eyes, the kind of man who looked like he could smell weakness across state lines, set down his pen and just stared. Another tapped the corner of their phone, as if making sure the recording was still running. I didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't defend myself. I just let Ethan enjoy his little performance, because I knew something he didn't. See, Ethan thought this was his grand moment, the coronation of the heir. His father, the old CEO, had stepped back after a health scare. Ethan walked in with a fresh badge, a fat title, and zero understanding of what actually kept this company alive. To him, operations were boring. To me, operations were oxygen. For 8 years, I'd been the one patching holes, smoothing vendor relationships, and keeping compliance threads from unraveling. Payroll, audits, logistics, all the invisible gears that keep the machine turning. I'd built most of them myself. Ethan thought cutting me loose was his way of proving he could lead. He had no clue that the same 2 weeks he just granted me would be the last 2 weeks of his career. But let's pause here, because I know some of you listen to these stories while cooking dinner, scrubbing dishes, or rage, walking around the block with your headphones in. All right, back to Ethan. The smirk, the power trip, the boy who thought he was a king. His PowerPoint was open on the big screen behind him, the title slide stuck on something he must have thought looked visionary. Core Vista 2.0, leaner, meaner, smarter. He even added a tagline at the bottom, "The future is us." I wish I were kidding. The buyers, 4 executives from a private equity firm called Halberg and Company, sat there like professional poker players. Unblinking. They hadn't flown in from New York to be dazzled by Ethan's catchphrases. These were people who could smell rot before the rest of the room even knew the lights had dimmed. And Ethan? He was wrought with cufflinks. Kelly has been helpful in the past, he continued, pretending to honor me while dismissing me in the same breath. But it's time to streamline leadership. Fresh ideas, young energy, aggressive expansion. 2 weeks, that's all I was worth to him. He didn't even glance at me while saying it, as if I was already erased from the building's directory. What Ethan didn't know, and what made the buyers' side eyes so delicious, was that for the past month I'd been quietly working with their due diligence team. Not begging, not scheming for revenge, just answering their questions, cleaning up Ethan's messes, forwarding the right documents when they asked for them, highlighting risks he didn't even understand were risks. I wasn't trying to save myself. Honestly, I was exhausted. But I wasn't going to let the company I'd built piece by piece collapse under his ego. And collapse, it almost did. The day Ethan showed up with his shiny new badge, he called an all-hands strategy huddle. No agenda, no notes. Just him standing at the front of the room in a designer suit, telling us we were going to disrupt silos and redefine synergy. Within a week, legal couldn't find signed contracts. Finance couldn't get approval on disbursements. IT was locked out of systems Ethan swore he had access to. He thought master access was a vibe. I kept things alive. Vendor negotiations, compliance filings, payroll schedules. I wasn't sleeping much. I was tired in ways coffee couldn't fix. But I wasn't ready to watch the company sink just because the boss's son wanted to cosplay as a visionary. So when the buyers reached out, not formally, just a quiet email from their VP of integration, a woman named Dana, I didn't give them speeches. I didn't whine about Ethan. I just sent them structure. Clean, dated, documented processes. The bones of the machine they were about to purchase. That was the turning point. And that's why, When Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, smirk plastered on, telling me I had 2 weeks left, I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't flinch. I just smiled. Because what he'd just announced to the buyers wasn't my farewell. It was his. And buried in a contract he hadn't even read, on a page he never knew existed, was the reason his smirk wouldn't survive the month. The first week after Ethan's grand announcement was chaos disguised as leadership. He strutted around the office like he'd just bought the building with his allowance, telling anyone who'd listen that Core Vista was entering its golden era. Meanwhile, the golden era looked a lot like unpaid invoices, confused department heads, and a dozen frantic phone calls hitting my desk every morning. I kept quiet. Not because I was powerless, but because I'd already learned something important. Fools burn themselves faster if you just hand them the matches. Take finance, for example. Quarter-end disbursements needed approval. Routine stuff. Normally handled in 2 signatures and a quick compliance check. Ethan, eager to prove he was decisive, told the team he'd streamline the process. His new method? Ignoring every email and writing "circle back later" in the subject line like it was a magic spell. By the 3rd day, vendor payments stalled. One supplier even drove to headquarters demanding answers because their trucks weren't rolling without clearance. I found Ethan in the break room, laughing with one of his friends from college, now suddenly our strategic transformation officer, and explained the gravity of the situation. He waved me off. "Kelly, maybe if you focused less on doom and gloom and more on adaptation, we wouldn't have these problems. Relax. We're innovating." I didn't argue. I just walked back to my desk and quietly forwarded the vendor contracts to Dana, the VP from Hallberg and Company. I highlighted the deadlines Ethan had missed and flagged the penalties we'd incur if nothing changed. I didn't editorialize. I didn't complain. Just the facts. 10 minutes later, Dana replied with 3 words. "Noted. Thank you." That was the first crack. The second came from IT. Ethan had bragged during his all-hands that he had master access to every system. The truth? He couldn't even reset his own password. When the compliance dashboard locked out the entire audit team, Ethan told them to just work offline for now. Offline. For a department managing federal reporting requirements. I stayed late that night, restoring access through the admin credentials only 2 of us had. I didn't tell Ethan, but the buyers noticed. Because the next morning, an email landed in my inbox, CC'd from Hallberg's legal team, asking for confirmation on our compliance timeline. My name was on the request, not his. That's when I realized my silence was starting to speak louder than his noise. Still, Ethan kept performing. He ordered a full company rebrand, complete with a new logo designed by a friend's girlfriend in Photoshop. He replaced our professional vendor management system with some flashy SaaS app he found on LinkedIn, convinced it would save costs. Within 48 hours, invoices disappeared, W-9s went missing, and our procurement lead nearly quit on the spot. I documented everything. Every missing file, every delayed approval, every Slack thread where Ethan told people to stop overthinking while projects bled money. I didn't run to HR, and I didn't gossip. I just quietly built a record, piece by piece, because I knew one day soon someone would ask the right question. And when they did, I'd be ready. One night, close to midnight, my inbox pinged. It was Dana again. "Do you have any continuity framework in place if leadership transitions further?" I stared at that line for a long time. Continuity framework. That wasn't a casual question. That was a buyer wondering if the person holding the keys knew how to keep the ship afloat without the captain. I didn't hesitate. I sent over the document I'd been building for months. Vendor scorecards, risk assessments, renewal timelines, disaster recovery procedures. Not fancy, not polished, just clean, bullet-pointed bones of the machine. Her reply came less than an hour later. "This is gold. We'll keep this between us for now." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen in an empty office. That was the moment I knew things were shifting. I wasn't just the woman Ethan dismissed as ops. I was becoming the bridge the buyers actually trusted. Meanwhile, Ethan kept digging. He copied Hallberg's executives on emails where he took credit for 6-month plans I'd built. He bragged about innovative initiatives that were nothing more than recycled templates I'd drafted years ago. And when deadlines slipped, he blamed legacy processes, as if the systems he barely understood had somehow betrayed him. The buyers didn't call him out. They didn't need to. They just kept watching. And I kept documenting. By the end of that second week, the tension in the building was thick enough to taste. Vendors were restless. Employees were whispering. And Ethan was still parading around like a king without a crown. He thought he was in control. But what he didn't realize was that every misstep, every delay, every smug dismissal was pushing him closer to a cliff. And I wasn't the one shoving him. He was running full speed toward it on his own. I just made sure the buyers had a clear view. Because in corporate wars, it's not the loudest voice that wins. It's the one with the receipts. By the start of the third week, the shift was undeniable. It wasn't dramatic, not some boardroom explosion with lawyers storming in. No, it was subtle. The kind of shift you only notice when silence starts speaking louder than words. Ethan's emails were still long and full of buzzwords. Synergy, disruption, growth mindset. But the buyers weren't replying, at least not to him. They were replying to me. It started small, a CC here, a quiet ping there. Then, one afternoon, I opened my inbox to find a direct request from Dana. "Kelly, can you confirm the timeline for vendor onboarding under Scenario B?" I stared at that line for a long time. It didn't say, "Can you ask Ethan?" It said, "Kelly. My name, direct. Clear, no middleman." That was the moment I knew they'd stopped seeing Ethan as a leader. He was background noise. I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the email to show anyone. I just answered. Clear, factual, professional. And that answer opened a door I didn't realize had been waiting for me. By the end of that week, I was invited to an informal alignment call. The calendar invite didn't even list Ethan. Just me and 2 Hallberg executives. 15 minutes off the record. I almost didn't accept. I'd spent years keeping my head down, doing the work without chasing the spotlight. But I clicked accept anyway. The call was simple. They asked about our compliance roadmap, about how vendor renewals were handled, about risks if leadership churned again. I didn't editorialize. Didn't badmouth Ethan. I just answered what was asked, point by point, as cleanly as possible. When the call ended, one of them, Alan, sharp suit, calm tone, said quietly, "Thank you, Kelly." That was exactly what we needed. That was the second shift. Because after that, the questions didn't stop. They grew. First once a week, then twice, then nearly daily. Always precise, always directed at me. And every time I answered, I could feel the ground tilting a little more in my favor. Meanwhile, Ethan was still busy playing CEO. He hosted innovation brainstorms in the break room with kombucha and beanbag chairs. He ordered a rebrand campaign with fonts he'd found on TikTok. He told HR to scrap half the reporting protocols because they were too old school. He thought he was steering the ship. He didn't see the iceberg. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, I opened my inbox to find a document from Hallberg's legal team. No message, no explanation, just a file. Core Vista Transition Staffing Draft. I opened it cautiously, expecting vague placeholders. But there it was, buried halfway down the page. A blank line labeled Continuity Lead, no name yet. Just a seat waiting to be filled. I flagged it, dragged it into a folder I'd started weeks earlier called Just in Case, because I knew one way or another that line would matter. And then came the third shift. It happened in a meeting Ethan wasn't supposed to invite me to, a system audit review with Hallberg's integration team. He didn't want to attend himself, so he forwarded me the invite with a quick note. Just cover this. They'll only ask about boring stuff anyway. Halfway through the call, Alan asked a question Ethan wouldn't have been able to answer in a million years. Do you have clean vendor onboarding metrics for the past 3 fiscal years? I could hear the pause, the kind of silence that would have exposed him instantly if he'd been on the call. I didn't hesitate. Yes, you'll find them in the second tab of the Ops Metrics file I shared last Thursday. Line 42 onward includes late cycle recovery factors. Silence again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was respect. Thank you, Kelly, Alan said, and the call moved on. Afterward, a message popped into my inbox. Would you be open to a short side-channel briefing on continuity risks? I didn't reply right away. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Because this wasn't just answering a question. This was stepping into a role I hadn't been officially offered. But in the end, I typed back one word. Yes. That's when the real transition began. The next briefing turned into 3. Then 4. I never speculated. Never complained. I just delivered data. Clean and undeniable. Contracts, metrics, risk reports. By the third call, Halberg's team had stopped treating me like a source. They were treating me like a leader. And then came the question that told me everything had changed. Kelly, if there were an ideal role for you post-close, one that ensures continuity and minimizes risk, what would it be? I didn't hesitate. Interim COO, Transition Americas. Not permanent, not flashy, just accurate. 2 days later, I received another draft document. This one wasn't blank. The line labeled Continuity Lead was filled. My name. Box checked. I sat there in the dark office, staring at the glow of the screen. My heart didn't race. I didn't cheer. I just felt a calm certainty wash over me. Ethan thought he was running the show. But the buyers had already written me into the script. And when the curtain lifted, he wouldn't even realize he wasn't the star. He was the punchline. The week before close felt like standing on a metal bridge and listening for the faintest vibration. Everything looked steady from the sidewalk. Underneath, the bolts were loosening. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy hosting Transformation Thursdays in the break room. White butcher paper, flowcharts, cucumber water, slogans, and dry erase marker. Meanwhile, legal was pinging me about audit trails, finance was chasing approvals, and procurement was nursing a queue of invoices that couldn't route because the lean vendor system Ethan installed didn't support our compliance fields. I kept doing what I'd been doing for months, answering questions without flair and keeping receipts without commentary. The buyers kept watching, and then they stopped pretending not to. It started with a meeting invite. The title used to read Leadership Transition Review. One morning, it landed in my inbox as an update. Post-close executive realignment. No explanation. Same time, same room. New subtext. That afternoon, HR forwarded me a draft statement they wanted to prep for optional use. I've read a lot of these. Polite sentences that smudge edges. This one was different. Kelly's leadership has been instrumental in preserving operational integrity during this period. Her forward-looking frameworks position Core Vista for continuity post-close. I read that last line twice. Post-close. HR doesn't write post-close unless someone higher has already said the quiet part out loud. Ethan signed off on the draft within minutes. He CC'd me with a thumbs-up emoji and a note. We'll polish this for your farewell next Friday. He really thought he was writing my eulogy. That evening, long after the building went dark, I opened a file I'd been ignoring. Core Vista Transition Staffing Agreement. Final draft. It had been sitting in my inbox for 2 weeks, sent by Halberg's counsel after a flurry of late-night calls. I hadn't read it because I already understood the bones of the plan. But something about that retitled meeting nagged at me. 73 pages, charts, schedules, signature blocks. I skimmed past the noise until I hit the thick of it. Definitions, authorities, sign-off paths. And then, there it was. Page 14. 3E Transition Staffing and Continuity Oversight. All staffing decisions affecting operational integrity during the transition phase must receive final approval from the designated continuity lead. This authority cannot be overridden by temporary or interim executives not ratified by the board. One more line, unadorned, sitting there like a fuse. Continuity lead, Kelly M. Dwyer. No bold, no italics, just my name, tucked into the paragraph Ethan had initialed in the margin with a sloppy EH. I sat back in the empty conference room and let the sentence settle. It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't a gift. It was a lever. The buyers hadn't argued with Ethan. They'd simply removed the part of the machine he could touch. I highlighted the clause and forwarded the document to my personal archive with a single subject line. Just in case. Then I printed page 14 and slid it into a plain manila folder. Paper has a way of silencing noise. The next morning, Ethan blasted a company-wide email with the subject line, "Exciting next chapter, Core Vista x Halberg." The body was a collage of MBA phrases and future-ready mindset pep. He thanked everyone for embracing change and promised a seamless leadership transition. I stared at the word seamless. He had no idea what it meant. 5 minutes later, a short message popped up in my chat. Not from Dana, from the buyer's CEO. We had never exchanged a direct message. Bring your card tomorrow. No emoji, no preamble. 4 words that said everything. I typed the only reply that felt appropriate. Understood. That afternoon, I did something ordinary. I walked to the print shop on the ground floor and ordered a small run of cards in matte stock. Clean type, no flourish. Kelly M. Dwyer, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Americas, Halberg and Company. The clerk cut them with a steady hand and slid the stack across the counter like he was passing along a quiet verdict. I put one into a slim case and tucked it into my bag. Back upstairs, Ethan was holding court with his strategic officer, brainstorming a rebrand that replaced our risk sign-offs with emojis. He waved at me through the glass like we were old friends. I waved back. There's a special kind of calm in knowing you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. The day before the meeting, procurement escalated. 5 critical vendors frozen in the system because Ethan's new platform didn't support W-9 verification the way our auditors required. Legal was ready to light their hair on fire. Ethan responded with, "Let's not overreact. Innovation looks messy." I sent Dana a tidy, time-stamped packet. Change logs, access requests, Slack threads, and the remediation plan I'd already staged. 10 minutes later, she replied, "Received. Thank you." No one looped Ethan. That night, I packed my bag like I was getting ready for a trip. Notebook, contract copy, 2 pens, the card case. I slept finally, the kind of sleep that comes after months of bracing your shoulders against doors other people are leaning on. Morning broke with the humorless light of a conference day. Someone had set out branded folders and sparkling water. HR parked themselves on the left. Halberg's team took the right. Still, precise, practiced. Ethan strode past my chair and nodded at the table as if it were his stage. He didn't see the manila folder under my hand. He didn't see that the stage directions had already changed. On the way in, Dana brushed past and placed a yellow sticky flag on my copy of the agreement. No words, just a small tab, the kind you use when you know a page matters. Page 14. Ethan cleared his throat, rolled his shoulders, and started his speech. We're aligned, we're lean, and we're ready to turn the page. He thanked the teams, name-checked a spreadsheet he'd never opened, and gestured toward me like a museum docent. And of course, Kelly will transition out over the next 2 weeks. I didn't correct him. I just reached into my bag, felt the cool edge of the card case, and waited for the buyer, CEO, to look up. Almost time. Because consequences don't arrive with sirens in corporate life. They arrive in footnotes, in signatures, and in the moment someone finally reads page 14 out loud. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. Folders lay neatly stacked, water glasses filled halfway, pens aligned like surgical tools. Halberg's executives sat in their practiced stillness, not a smile, not a frown, just that steady poker face patience. Ethan stood at the head of the table, shoulders square, tie too tight, eyes shining with the certainty of someone who thinks they're about to be crowned. This acquisition, he began, pacing like he was auditioning for a stage play, marks the next evolution of Core Vista. a smarter, sharper, more agile future. And I'd like to personally thank everyone who helped us get here, including Kelly, who will be transitioning out over the next 2 weeks. His voice carried confidence, but the words felt hollow, like a drumbeat echoing in an empty hall. Bryce, the so-called transformation officer, clapped. HR nodded politely. Someone typed something into their notes app. And then, silence. I didn't bow my head, didn't force a smile. Instead, I reached slowly into my bag, pulled out the slim case, and slid one card across the polished table toward Halberg's CEO. Matte black. White ink, clean font. Kelly M. Dwyer, interim COO, Transition Operations, Americas, Halberg and Company. The CEO picked it up, glanced at it, and for the first time all morning, his face shifted. His lips curled into laughter. Sharp, sudden, delighted. Not cruel, but the kind of laughter that bursts out when a punchline lands in a joke you didn't even know was building. Ethan froze mid-sentence. Something funny? He asked, voice cracking at the edges. The CEO didn't answer. He tilted the card toward Alan, seated to his right. Alan read it, smiled. Not a smirk, not a politeness, but a knowing grin, and slid it back. Then, with a deliberate hand, Alan opened his binder, flipped straight to a page marked with a yellow sticky flag, and laid it flat on the table. Page 14. Mr. Harrison, the CEO said calmly, perhaps you should revisit the staffing agreement you signed. Ethan blinked, confused, scanning the page like he was seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on the paragraph, lips moving as he mouthed the words. Continuity lead, Kelly M. Dwyer. His signature sat at the bottom, crooked and careless, the ink that sealed his own fate. No, he stammered. That's not binding. She's not. Dana leaned forward, voice even. It is binding. You initialed it. Final approval on all operational staffing falls under Kelly's authority for the next 90 days. The room went quiet. You could hear the click of a pen, the faint hum of the air vent. Bryce shifted uncomfortably, staring down at his phone like salvation might arrive in a text message. HR suddenly found the wood grain of the table very interesting. The CEO tapped the page once with his finger. You granted this authority yourself, Mr. Harrison. Consider your 2 weeks reassigned. Ethan's face drained of color. He looked from me to the page, back to the CEO, as if the walls might crack open and swallow him before the humiliation set in. His hands hovered above the table, twitching slightly, like a man reaching for a crown that had already been melted down. We've arranged a new role for you, Alan added smoothly. Facilities operations, Kansas City branch, night shift. They could use help with forklift scheduling. It was over. Not with shouting, not with fists on the table, but with the soft finality of a signature already written weeks before. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I simply accepted the small envelope HR slid across to me. Inside, a badge with Halberg's logo. My name, my title, interim COO. The clip snapped into place on my lapel with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than Ethan's entire speech. Thank you all, I said, standing. I look forward to getting started. No one objected. No one interrupted, because it was done. I walked toward the door, my heels steady against the polished floor. Behind me, I heard Ethan's voice, small, cracking. Wait, she reports to you? The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look up from the contract. He just smiled, slow and deliberate. No, Mr. Harrison. For the next 90 days, she is me. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I left Ethan standing in the ruins of his self-made empire, drowning not in noise but in the one thing he'd never accounted for: consequence. And that's the truth about power. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes all it takes to end a career is a single card slid across a table.